It was in the summer of 2001, a fairly hot one as I recall, that I first visited South Korea, the more agreeable half of that East Asian peninsula that has been divided in two for some 73 years now. As much as North Korea routinely makes the news with its belligerence and promises of hellfire, you wouldn't know it to visit the other Korea, which prospers below the 38th parallel, not unless you purposely travel to the border, and even that has a strong element of the tourist attraction about it. Because 73 years, or even 48 as it was in 2001, is a long time. Enough back then for 2 generations to spring up at the turn of the millennium, and now 3 in 2026. Not only is the past another country, but so too, inevitably, is North Korea. Yet the ancient past is not so easily forgotten in South Korea. On the contrary, much of it is a source of pride, a pleasing reminder to the Korean native of their civilization's significantly long history. Among the more tangible surviving monuments of that distant past to be found in Seoul are the remains of the city wall, nominated in 2012 for inclusion in the UNESCO World Heritage List. Today, Seoul spans an area of more than 600 square kilometers, or over 230 square miles, and accommodates a population of 10 million. In the days when the city wall stood intact and Seoul was not the sprawling, futuristic metropolis it is now, the population of Hanyang, as it was then known, was closer to 300,000 in the 18th century, and smaller still when Hanyang became the nation's capital in 1394, when the country called itself Joseon. Nonetheless, while the more adventurous can spend a day hiking along the surviving fragments of the city wall, they would be hard-pressed to finish the course in that time. However, they could quite easily explore the environs of the surviving Great Gates of Hanyang. One of them, the Great East Gate, or Dongdaemun as it is known in Korean, is particularly accessible. Today, the structure, with its impressive stone base and multi-story sloping tiled roof, is an imposing anachronism in the modern capital, surrounded by busy roadways, department stores, and design galleries of a different aesthetic altogether. But still it stands, and shows no signs of disappearing altogether any time soon. Gone, though, is the great water gate that once stood nearby, which once channeled the cascading rainwater from Seoul's mountains into the Cheonggyecheon, an urban stream connected to the Han River. If you walk along one particular part of that stream today, you can see 5 arched tunnels high above the waterline, their purpose more decorative than functional. They mark the spot where the Organsumun, or 5-arched floodgate, was said to have stood. And it is there, centuries earlier, that our curious tale of the soldier and the serpent took place. In the time of Joseon, Korea's last great dynastic kingdom, the serpent was believed to be a water sprite. If found on land, it was said to have lost its way in the world, and nothing good would come of such a transgression. There is no precise date to the story, since the author of which, one Im Bang, about whom we will learn more later, intended it as a cautionary tale. However, it occurred when the city wall was still fully intact, and when the great water gate mentioned earlier still stood and performed its vital function. The stone barrier also served another vital purpose, that of keeping out unwanted intruders, man or beast, from Hanyang's inner sanctum. For this reason, each of the 5 arches of the water gate were fitted with a series of iron bars, wide enough to admit escaping rainwater, but sufficiently narrow so as to block entry to all but frogs and rodents. There was, however, no such thing as being too vigilant when it came to holding the fort, and so a dedicated soldier was assigned guard duty over the water gate to ensure its security. The soldier, also a skilled archer, took residence, along with his wife, in a house near the gate allocated for this very occupation. He therefore had no great distance to cover to start his daily patrol, the arched tunnels of the sluice easily visible from his front door. Nonetheless, the soldier conducted his sentry duties with pride and diligence. The position didn't carry with it quite the same prestige as those who kept a watchful eye over the comings and goings of human traffic through the great east gate nearby, but then that also made it more desirable in many ways. So long as he kept to his routine, which he unfailingly did, he was left to guard his assigned corner of the realm in peace. Even those selected for this quieter post still had to meet a high standard, and that, therefore, was an accolade he carried with him in every confident step he took along the wall. One particular day came, when he was already well into his routine, that his eye fell upon some kind of obstruction in one of the sluice tunnels, and he made haste toward it. Indeed, whatever the blockage was, it had to be a living object, for it was jerking about spasmodically, as if trying to free itself. Coming closer to it, the soldier saw that it was the head of a large snake, one that had presumably tried to force its way in through the iron bars, and having greatly misjudged the size of its own body, had become trapped between them. The soldier responded to the spectacle practically on instinct. His duty was clear. Immediately drawing his bow, he fired an arrow on a perfect trajectory straight through the creature's head, killing it instantly. This done, he then retrieved its lifeless, unprotesting corpse and crushed it for easy disposal, discarding the remains through the sluice and carrying on with his patrol, thinking little more of it. Not altogether long after the incident, though no one in the household was thinking in such terms, the soldier's wife became pregnant, and the couple waited with happy anticipation for the birth of their child. They were therefore doubly pleased when it turned out to be a son. Speculation quickly turned to the possibilities in the boy's future, of him following in his father's footsteps. Better yet, of attaining a higher rank and serving the city with even greater prestige. However, the jubilation was to be short-lived. Few babies do not howl with indignation when taken unhappily from the comfort of the womb, but surely their protestations are not this shrill, nor this sustained. Before long, the source of the infant's distress soon became apparent, as it seemed that its shrieks were wildest when the soldier was in close proximity. The child, for reasons unfathomable, was utterly terrified of its father, not only crying but cowering in fear, as much as a baby could physically do so at the mere sight of him. For the time being, they put its distress down to unusual sensitivity, something that would resolve itself in time. Yet things did not improve with time, and as the boy grew older, his fear took on a more malignant tone, his open hatred of his father readily apparent to anyone present. In response, and feeling himself the victim of a great injustice, had he not always treated the boy as any decent father would, the soldier began to cultivate a deep suspicion of his son, which eventually became a likewise unmasked resentment. No reason could be ascribed to the child's malice, and nothing anyone did could assuage it. One day, matters came to a head, but in ways that those who pay no attention to coincidences, since no one in the household was thinking in such terms, could have imagined. It was midday, and the mother had gone out to run errands, leaving the boy alone with his father, whose rest period had not yet ended. By now, the soldier was predisposed to a deep-rooted suspicion under such circumstances, and a firm conviction to never take his eye off the other for an instant. However, suspicions alone were nothing if not put to the test, and perhaps the soldier had simply become weary of not knowing. To fear for one's life because of one's own son was an intolerable state of affairs, one that had gone on for far too long. So he lay down, pretending to take his midday nap. Perfectly normal, entirely routine, but all the while secretly watching his son's movements from behind a carefully positioned sleeve over his face. It did not take long for his fears to become realized, for shortly afterwards, believing the older man to have fallen asleep, the boy took up a knife, moved stealthily toward the prone form, and made to stab him, his youthful face twisted with loathing. Instantly alert, the soldier sprang up and intercepted the blade. Then, with equal speed born of many years' combat training, he clubbed his attacker to death. Methodically, as before, he crushed the body to a pulp and left the remains where they lay. There would be rituals to perform, but for now his sentry duties took precedence, and it was with no great reluctance that they should demand his attention for a while. It was the mother who returned home first, and struggling through a deep well of emotions, she tearfully covered what was left of the juvenile body with a blanket in preparation for burial. Her grief was not coloured by surprise, for something deep within her knew that matters would come to a head sooner or later. However, she pushed such thoughts to the back of her mind, instead focusing on the proper observances that must now follow. And yet surely that wasn't the blanket quivering because of her hand. On the contrary, it seemed to be animated entirely on its own, as if compelled by something beneath. Puzzled, she reached out a tentative hand toward it, managing to pull it back in order to find out the source of the disturbance. The sight that confronted her almost caused paralysis. The boy's corpse was gone. In its place, writhing and glaring up at her, was a huge, coiled snake. Instinct taking over, she fled the room, sealing it shut. It would be some time before her husband finished his patrol. In the meantime, she had no intention of setting foot in the room again. Through the door, she could hear a muffled sound, as if of something heavy, sliding itself across a flattened surface. When indeed the soldier did return that evening, she was half crazed with fear, giving him a fantastic account through stumbling lips that it would have been hard to believe from someone speaking calmly. That she had been frightened out of her wits by something was plain, however, and, accompanied by entreaties to be careful, he made for the room in order to confront the disturbance for himself. He threw open the door, and there, just as his wife had described, was the great snake where the child had once been. Content, it seemed, not to stray too far from where it had first manifested. Two baleful yellow eyes stared hatefully into his own. The enmity seemed more intense than that of a simple animal predator. Instead, it felt directed at him personally. Then he noticed the mark on its head. Angular, pitted, like the killing blow of an arrowhead. The soldier stared at the creature open-mouthed for a moment. The snake remained where it lay coiled, but for its head still wavering from side to side, its eyes deadlocked with his own, a deep hissing erupting through its fanged mouth. Waiting, triumphant. For a moment the soldier sighed, as though coming to an uncomfortable realization. However, when he spoke to the intruder, the anger was palpable. You and I? It was not by nature that we should have become enemies. I have a responsibility to this city. It was, and still is, my duty to protect the Watergate from any intruders. However, he faltered. However, it was still wrong of me to kill you as I did. It is my training to act swiftly in the pursuit of justice, but you were trapped in there, hardly a great threat. Then a new note of anguish crept into his voice. The snake seemed to bow its head, as though listening intently to every word. Yet that hardly excuses your actions since. To be reborn as my son, and then as my son to try and take my life, to destroy my family, was nothing short of horrendous. Do you think the scales have been balanced? If it was right for you to become my son expressly in order to take revenge, then, he gestured with his bow, Is it not equally right that I should take your life once more? Shall we be locked in battle forever?" He fell silent for a moment, then spoke more calmly, an edge of steel lining his words. "No. No more of this. You have had your revenge, and even returned to your original form into the bargain. Let us call it even, then. Leave now, and do not let me see you here ever again." For a moment the creature remained where it was, its head still bowed, seeming to digest the information. Then it lifted its head and started to move toward him. The soldier regarded the other calmly, refusing to move. However, the snake passed him by, slithering instead to the open door beyond. In a moment it was gone. He followed after it as far as the door to the house. From the entrance he could see it making purposefully for the water gate nearby. A moment further, and it had passed between the bars, this time meeting no obstruction, and down to the bubbling waters of the stream below. I am told that it was never to be seen again. The final word, however, goes to Im Bang, the author of this tale, who rounded it off with the following observation. "Man is a spiritual being, and different from all other created things. And though a snake has the power of venom, it is still an insignificant thing compared to man. This snake died, and by means of the transmigration of its soul, took its revenge. Man dies, but I have never heard of him transmigrating as the snake did. Why is it that though a spiritual being, he is unable to do what the beasts do? I have seen many innocent men killed, but not one of them has ever returned to take their revenge upon their murderers. And so I wonder more than ever about the story of the snake. That the superior man knows nothing of the law that governs these things is a great source of regret to me." In The Serpent's Revenge, Im illustrates the karmic nature of Buddhist reincarnation, the story colourfully demonstrating how the actions one takes in each earthly life determines the form they will take in the next. Through its act of revenge, the snake, posing as a child, reverts to its serpentine form. By realizing his earlier mistake, and by sparing the snake's life the second time, the soldier breaks the cycle of destruction, and, we can assume, will find himself in good standing when his own soul is judged later on. Im Bang was born in 1648. He was a civil servant, scholar, and writer during Korea's Joseon dynasty, which lasted from 1392 to 1910. It was during the Joseon period that Korea strongly embraced Confucianism, arguably more fully than China, where it had originated, perhaps due to Korea's smaller size. However, Im was a devout Buddhist, and while not opposed to Confucian doctrine in principle, cautioned others through his writing not to eschew Buddhist spiritualism, whose reach transcended earthly concerns in favor of Confucian ideology, which dealt exclusively with human affairs. The price one paid for doing so was costly, one that Im explored in graphic detail in another of his short stories, Hong Experiences Hell, which you can find my reading of on this channel. For now, however, I will leave you with the words of Gautama Buddha. "Through many a birth wandered I, seeking the builder of this house. Sorrowful indeed is birth again and again."